Very good. It's 1 o'clock, and so we will begin the EDIC meeting for today. And basically, Jim, if you want to get us started, but basically today it's going to be a conversation about policy. And so if you want to get us started, that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Dave. What I passed out was four pages, and I'd like to just kind of go through that and get your initial thoughts on it. I'll kind of go through all four right away, and then we'll go back and kind of focus in on that second page. The first page is the current policy that we have for public-private partnerships. And one of the things you'll see in here is it says typically it's a difficult to develop site. And so the ones that we've approved most recently have been in the downtown or some type of brownfield, and a site where you may see no development without some type of public assistance. What we're looking at expanding is providing assistance to sites that may have no problem getting developed with a typical development, but we want something different in terms of density or public amenities. So anyway, this is the current policy. You'll see that on the first page. The second one would be a proposed kind of new page following that first page that I showed you, that would talk about a public-private partnership where we're focused more on community facilities in higher density developments. And this is what I'd like to spend some time on to get your thoughts on it. And so, we've been talking a lot about a water park, but I've been approached by developers that were interested in, convention centers or museums, or, it could be some other type of tourism attraction. And so the question is, do we provide property tax incentives or infrastructure incentives or some other type of assistance to develop areas where we want something like one of these facilities? The other thing that we talked about a little bit is, do we want to provide some incentives to get higher density developments? And so this first part talks about more, we want a convention center, and so we give a property tax exemption to the facility and the hotel or some other, nearby housing, in order to get income to help pay for such a facility as part of a public-private partnership. In no specifics, but that's been some questions we've had asked of us. The other thing, when we look at our Go 2030 plan in the past, we talked about trying to have higher density development, and with when the diversion authority, as that's being built, that's kind of creating more of a finite geographic shape for the city. And so are there areas where we want to encourage higher density? I'm not suggesting that we do it on every block in town, but as part of our growth plan process, as part of a redevelopment, the city may want to have an area where we feel like this is an important site where we can get much higher density than we would typically have. And so do we provide some incentives for that? The areas, I just suggested that they could have some of these following characteristics. One being, both office and retail space, a much higher density than your typical commercial or apartment developments, shared parking, try to have housing at a range of costs and prices, include recreation facilities, have a walkable neighborhood and connected to adjacent development, as well as efficient public infrastructure. And similar to other policy, I don't think there's any real standard where you can kind of get out a cookbook and say this is what we're going to have. You need to have some flexibility because every site's unique. Every site has unique neighboring facilities. The process would be not unlike the other policy, would be that initial discussions with city officials and this committee, kind of talk about the concept, and then if the concept seemed good, you would get into the details and develop a business plan for both the developer and the city to see if something could be done. And that would be followed up by the development agreement, and then the implementation of that development agreement. It's certainly important to make sure we monitor and get what we anticipated. So this is kind of a first draft at what an expanded policy could look like. Want to get your thoughts on this. I'll jump ahead a little bit, and then these are the criteria we talked about at the last meeting. Then how would we rate these? And so we'd have sort of a scoring system on public benefit, property value increase, need for assistance, design, infrastructure, added some economic impact and tourism as criteria. If we go back to this one, just want to get your thoughts on this. So you feel we're on the right track?
Okay, so Jim's kind of kicked it off, and so I guess I'm interested in comments from everybody up here. And obviously, if anybody in the audience wants to come up and give comments, you're welcome to do that too. I guess one of the ideas that you had in the past was to do the comparison of what's street level parking versus putting a ramp in to some of these projects. I thought that was and be able to show us what that will cost versus. I don't know if that makes sense to me. That's go ahead, and I don't mean to steal your thunder, but go ahead and talk about that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No thunder stolen at all. I guess when I think about this as it pertains to specifically the parking aspect, when we're saying, hey, we want to incentivize development of dense property, and due to parking policy, I need to have X amount of parking spaces. But if I spend more money on a parking structure, that will help increase my density. If the city is saying that's what we want to incent, what is the cost of that surface parking lot versus the cost of that actual parking structure? And why wouldn't we just say, hey, we can incent the difference between those two costs? If it's $10 million to do the surface parking lot, and if it's $15 million to do the actual parking structure, wouldn't it make sense for us to say we will incent up to that $5 million to say, we'd like you to be able to do the structure versus the overland lot. That's obviously a small example as it pertains to this P3 policy, but something to consider is we're not paying for the whole thing, we're paying for the difference so that we can be a little bit more direct in how we do that.
Yeah, I like that because we're driving towards a metric there, and what I think we could pull out of this is going back to benefit cost ratios. And so using the parking example, that the incentive provided to the ramp would have to be supported by the additional taxable value added on where it was going to be surface lot. So I think we could refine this back to the point that said, if you kind of think of it in thirds, that here's the parking requirement with surface lots. Typically, if you do a ramp, you're going to use 1/3 of that area. So the remaining 2/3 of the area has to generate additional taxable value to create taxes to offset the incentive provided for the ramp. And so what we're saying there in the argument, we aren't giving money away. We're saying if you do this incentive will help you. It will then, after the repayment of the cost of the ramp, have additional tax value that goes on into perpetuity.
And Jim, the other thing we talked about was, are there going to be, like with the planning department, is there something we should find out? Are there certain areas where that is going to be the focus? I guess that's something that, to look at for the future.
Yeah, I think when we get that growth plan, there'll be certain areas where we say we want higher density mixed use, and so that's where you would focus the incentive. And as far as the parking, the city assessor was I was saying, I think at the last meeting, they value surface parking at about $5 a square foot for concrete parking, which is not, a very high value. Where you get some apartment complexes, you get, $200 per square foot overall on the development. In downtown, we have things that go well over $1,000 a square foot in terms of the amount of property value per square foot of land value. And so that the density helps. I think Block 9 is probably over $100,000 a square foot in terms of the value of that block compared to, maybe some of the suburban areas it's $50. So you can see there's just a huge difference between downtown and a higher density development. The other important part about parking is that if you can do shared parking where, downtown we have residents use it at night, office workers use it during the day, and so it gets a dual use. And so instead of having to build parking for the daytime, parking for the nighttime, when it's shared, then becomes twice as efficient. And I think that's one of the things you'll see here with a hotel and offices in the same area.
That's the one thing with those lots is, and it's even more than dual use, it's multiple use. I mean, sometimes there's multiple different customers that are going to use that same parking spot over the day. So that is a huge thing. The thing I want to caution is, so let's say the planning department identifies an area. Well, to give an example, like Bruhalla, that was never in anybody's wildest dreams a target area for redevelopment. And so part of it is, I think we have to have flexibility because I mean, that was literally a very unique project that came up and we supported. But I don't think in the past that was identified as an area that we really wanted to promote increased density, but that is what's happened. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think that's an important point. We have the land use plans, but they're not carved in stone, and sometimes people come up with ideas for reuse that make a lot of sense.
Jessica, do you have any?
I overall, I think it's a much better example of what we're trying to accomplish. I think it's important in the policy to notate wherever possible what this assists in accomplishing, like you've mentioned, or the 2030 plan. If we can, anyone picking this up to somebody who has ingested all these conversations before can pick it up and go, okay, this aligns with something larger than this, or to reference this point. I know we have it in here before of like city plans and such, but the more that we can connect the dots for people as they're trying to read it and understand it, the better. So I think we're on our way to that. That's the only other question that I had, and I really like our benefits cost ratio approach if we decide to go that route, but is also identifying who's going to own the monitoring, what city department or what area or what committee will then assist in the insights of the post analysis and monitoring of was it successful, so that we can pull forward learns into next projects or next approvals, and that we've identified that, so that people don't think somebody else is monitoring that due diligence portion of the approval process.
Yeah, I think that's important. And actually, one of the things that kind of I have on my list of things to finish is to just give you a report on past TIF districts that you've approved. Where did they start? Where are they going? And then the other model, the wrong one here. The other model we have is something we got a year ago. This was an economic impact tool. And so, this is for the water park. You put in what it is, how many $1 million it'll cost, how many jobs, and then it calculates an estimate of the economic output, total jobs in construction, spin-off retail, and these other impacts. So you could take the same site, put a water park in, and then put in apartment buildings, and you could run the comparison and see what the difference is. So this is a tool we'll have available to evaluate specific projects.
And I guess, Jim, so what I really like is we're trying to make it more objective with our score sheet, with the total score. And I guess, so page number 2 is kind of the overall, and then page number 3 is then that's the score sheet. Is that how you would describe it?
Yes.
And I guess what I really like is there's lots of topics that we're looking at as far as evaluating the project, like walkability. Is there already infrastructure so we don't, or is the city going to have to add additional infrastructure with that project? So I do like a lot of the topics that we're evaluating, and I to me the scoring points, that's to me that's a little bit of a challenge to make sure we're setting those scores so they're appropriate. I guess I'm interested in everyone's perspective on those, and if they think they're correct. I think that might have to be refined as time goes on too, but I do like the list of things. To me, that's an excellent list of things to evaluate. Any comments on that, John?
I would just maybe try to make Jim's jobs a little bit tougher, but one of the things that's going to happen here is that if we're looking for additional development as a requirement for this, that's going to happen over time. And I wonder if we wouldn't be better off that the incentives could be granted per year and require a certain amount of building permit value to issue them each year. So the one thing I worry about this is that in the example that of the water park is that has additional development, but it can't all happen in the first year. It's going to happen while the incentive would be in place. So if they're not progressing along some timeline, that the incentive would just stop at that point.
As we were visiting with the city attorney on how we could structure this is with that payment in lieu of taxes, you can set a schedule, for the next 10 years. And so if you say we want, another building 2 by year 3, and if you do it, your tax is 0, and if you don't, your tax is $800,000. What it would have been. So you can, with the pilot program, it gives you the ability, I think, to create different alternative schedules depending on certain triggers. So if they get stuff done, they get the exemption. If they don't, there's this automatic clawback in the pilot agreement.
Any other comments, Mayor?
Yeah, I think, John, we've always tried to develop clawbacks and never finally defined them. I think if we could clear that up and kind of define it a bit, because we have had some developments where it's delayed or takes time or whatever. And I think, sometimes economy has to do what's going on in the economy, slows things down or whatever. I think we were talking before the meeting was talking, the other thing we'd like to consider is maybe some type of scoreboard. So a lot of times we've always had, some of our stuff's already been finished, Jim, and that has brought more taxable value to the city. I think Commissioner Pepcorn's always asked, what has it done to local property taxes? I think you have a quote that it's decreased property taxes by 4%. But I think it'd be nice to have that where we understand certain properties have grown in value. Downtown is a perfect example. We went from 150 million or to 1 billion in property values. Well, the public has to understand that's all in taxes. That increases the tax burden to those buildings as well. But we were talking about maybe having some kind of scorecard where we can show, I think some questions were asked last night, how does this help the public? Okay, we ordered TIF, pilot, whatever we've offered to these different developers. And here's what it's brought back to us, to your question, John, too, is how much did we get? Did we get a $4 million developer, an $80 million development? And we're trying to stimulate the bigger projects theoretically with this. We've done the downtown, but the green spaces are now, they're going to be the places we go. And the other thing I notice about our developers too is that we've suddenly lost the 4-story building. We're now at 6 or 7 stories, which we never vertically used to do that. But they were almost getting like a big city, where they have skyscrapers and stuff. I mean, you start to notice bigger and bigger buildings go up with better density for the community. I think we were talking, just before we started also about maybe we get the planning department involved here to discuss density and the growth plan and what did we learn in the growth plan. So if the water park did have some infrastructure and buildings going up that would help us with that. But we want to stimulate growth in the community, better density, smart growth in our community, and/or amenities that people will enjoy. And I think that that's what we're beginning to see, where people think about parks, they think about different things that the public would like. And Katie bar the door, I noticed this weekend, just in my neighborhood, I mean, it's hot out, but people are out, they're walking, they're exercising, taking their dogs, they're biking, they're doing different things. And what I love about our community is a lot of people are taking that quality of life pretty serious. So with planning, I think we should define a little bit of quality of life. What are you offering to the quality of life and/or point it to, if we do, because we don't want just density and an ugly building and things that don't help with the community. So I do like, Jim, many of the things you have here. I think sometimes it's going to be hard to duplicate this particular project, only because of all the different amenities that are by it. But it'll be interesting going forward as well. And just one question on that. Was there a rule one time that 10% of your land had to be, like on a new housing development project, that 10% had to go to the park board?
Yeah, some cities have that requirement. We've never had that hard and fast rule, but it's not uncommon for a city, in order to get park space, to tell a developer you either have to provide 10% in land or some cash payment equivalent of that. And park was always more negotiated, the parks with the developer, and so. And the
Because we have all
resident-
these pocket parks all over, and I don't know if that's the goal of the park board, so maybe we need them involved in our discussions as well as the planning committee, so.
So a couple of things, just real quick. Hopefully everyone has got these 3 sheets, and what we'll do, for a lot of people, this is the first time they've seen what we're talking about. And so if it's okay with you, Jim, could you share your contact information? And so if anybody has, to give you an example, with the different lists of things that they want us to ask about or to focus on, if they have something that they want to add, they could contact you, because this is our first kind of open discussion, and we'll have, I would anticipate we're going to have lots of them, and so everyone will have an opportunity. But if that's okay with you, Jim, to have a way for anybody that's either watching online or in the audience, if they want to have some type of topic included, if they could contact you. And the other thing about the scoring too, if you feel some of these scores are you'd like to have more points for something, one topic or another, if you could contact us, that'd be good too. But we'll have lots of opportunities. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah, and I'd like to get your input on how fast you want to try to bring this to the city commission and kind of the schedule. And this is just my thought, is probably the most accelerated we could do would be if you wanted to meet again next week and maybe make some additional changes to that. And then after that, and even now, between now and then, we could post it to our website and allow people to submit comments. But I thought if we could start to get comments, maybe take another look at that this week and have a public comment through August 14th with a special meeting August 15th. And back to city commission.
So Jim, since I'm the chair, we are not going to expedite this.
Okay.
We are not going to rush this. This is very important, and it's important to be methodical, because what we're doing is we're setting a roadmap for a long time from now. And so that's why purposely we split that project last night. We need to do this very slowly and make sure we get public comment, get developers involved. We do not need, this is just my opinion, and I apologize, but I think it's very important. And when we talked about, when we did this, we redid our this a couple of years ago. It took a long time. But it's very important for us to do, and so that's just my opinion. And anybody, you can disagree if you want to, but I just think the other thing is we need to take time for the public to participate. We had lots of developers that wanted to participate too, and that's what we need to do. Any other comments on that? Jessica, go ahead.
My other comment would be that we want your feedback because we don't have the perspective you have. You know, we're not building things, we're on the other side of the fence, so please openly share any suggestions that you have so that we can make this as appropriate as possible and do the highest of quality of work so that we can move forward and do great things.
And I guess, Mayor, I'm interested in your perspective on that, not to put you on the spot, but you were here when we last reviewed this, it took a lot of time, and it sets the tone for a long time. So that's why. Go ahead.
Yeah, Commissioner Pepper, and the only thing, obviously, we have a development in front of us that wants to move a little bit. I just would like more, maybe we put more time and move a little bit quicker on it, just to bring the parties in that we need to talk to, a week or so if we could. I just would rather not do it every month we meet. I'd rather move us a little bit quicker than that. And it's really a one-question issue, right? And Levi's here, when they talked about stuff in West Fargo, they sometimes move stuff up. When we did the school system, we kind of moved to a more reactive issue, but totally agree that we need to get all of the people at the table. But would like, Jim, is if you gave a timetable to us and then us, the other parties, can you be involved? I see Commissioner Preston in the room, but I mean, can we get planning involved, park board involved, school system involved, maybe for a meeting in 1 or 2 weeks and sit down and just have a brown bag and have a discussion, and or have us bring some ideas to that. I think that, again, the West Fargo system, you guys looked at use of land, the different parties that do it. The school system offered certain things. I think we've seen Park Board do some creative things as well, but bringing the right people together. So not disagreeing, we want to take a thoughtful look at this, but can we start bringing the people together and having discussions? I think what Commissioner Pepburn is saying is we may not have an answer in a month. It may take us a little longer. And I just would remind the commission that last time we looked at something that took 2 years. I don't want to take that long, but if we do really have the question of what do you do outside the downtown? How are we going to develop and have things happen? And or I think it does bring some questions. Some of our neighborhoods in the north, when we've done Roosevelt, when you put density in, what do you want in that density? So if that's going to become one of our factors on density, then we sometimes have to talk about that, because in your neighborhoods, right, you could put a 24-plex into it, or you could put 3 townhomes into it. Which one do we want? One has more density, one has more congestion. And I think the public sometimes, when they get in that factor, Wes brought up the thing affordability. Sometimes you're building stuff that's really not affordable. Are we going to reward that in some way? So I think there's some good debates we're going to have about it. I would just ask, Chairman, that we maybe move a little bit quicker so we don't take 2 years. That's my request. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if we stay off the monthly meeting, we'll come very short. It won't take nearly as long, but when we met once a month, it did take 2 years because it took, so if we speed that and truncate that up, we can get everybody involved without taking that significant period of time.
Yeah, right now, if the track record of the last month is it's a weekly meeting, which has been nice to keep things moving. I'll just hold this time in my schedule, and we'll keep moving forward. But I think it's really important as far as what the mayor brought up. When we're talking about this, obviously this is a slightly different policy in terms of we're looking for large scale development over $50 million. That's a big project, and that's an impactful project as far as the city is concerned. But when the mayor says, what are we trying to incent as a community? And we're talking about, hey, in the next 10 years, we need to attract 10,000 people here for new jobs in order to fill the jobs that we have projected. Where are those people going to live? And how are we incenting single-family home developers or developers that are doing different types of products in order for them to be building? I mean, that's a question that I have. If you hear the projections from the chamber and the EDC, they're saying it's one thing to fill jobs, it's another thing to have places for people to live when they fill the jobs. So how are we looking at that from the upstream perspective on, because we can fix the problem of parking density, but are we fixing the problem of the upstream policies that are saying we need this many parking spots for this type of development? Or we have to do X, I'm new to this, but I'm certain that there's a policy conversation to be had here upstream instead of fixing it with tax dollars all the way downstream where we're at now, and how do we balance those two things? So I'm really excited for the conversation between the planning and, getting everybody at the table, and including the developers that are in this room, to say, how do we do this? And what's inhibiting you from making this happen right now? Because clearly we don't have the answers in the room, but I think it's exciting to get all the people at the table. So, yeah, and moving a little faster than 2 years probably would be a good idea as well.
Just one other thing on that is that when we look at lots right now, City of Fargo is running out of lots, and we have to do something to stimulate development. think there's 160 apartments in this project. We need apartments. We need more areas where people can live. So the only thing, Commissioner Pepcorn, is I think we have a little urgency because that housing study says we need apartments. So we do have to think a little bit how can we stimulate that growth. And we got great developers in this community. Don't get me wrong. I've been very pleased with the developers we have, and the communities have grown. But we all have to get into this to try to get some solutions.
And I do think that was part of the frustration from the developers about this project was it's like we were making a new roadmap and they didn't know what the roadmap was. And so that's why to have them a part of this. But I guess, Jim, what I'm hearing is we have to have the planning department, we have to all be on the same page. And obviously the home study, obviously we found out we are going to need a lot of all kinds of housing. And so, but there's ways that we can help that, but also we want to make sure that we're working with the planning department and not going a different direction than they are. And so I think that's part of it.
Yeah, then I get my specific question is, do you want to try to meet next week and refine this a little bit, or do you want to just send this out for public comment and get together and say 3 weeks?
I guess what I would, and I apologize for speaking and kind of hogging the mic, but I would like to have some opportunity for public comment, but so the next meeting, I would like to have the developers and the planning department, if we could have some type of combination, so we could at least have an open communications of what we're looking at to make sure that we're doing the same thing.
Maybe we'll just shoot for either August 15th or your regular August 22nd meeting and see what works.
Could we,
If that's
could we
okay
do the
with you.
15th, Dave? Would that be okay?
Yeah, no,
I have
that's-
budget next week, so I'm sure all you want to hear about my budget, but if we could maybe in 2 weeks meet and then have our meetings, would that be okay?
Is that okay with everyone? And if anybody is here, especially, I know there were some developers, I think if you recall, Jim, we had a list of them that were objecting and that wanted to be involved. I think we want to make for sure that they are invited, because I think that was, like I said, I think they're a little bit fearful that they didn't really know what's our direction. And so I think that's very important to have them included, so.
Okay, well,
Hey, Commissioner Pepcorn,
Yep.
this is John Iser. What date are we looking at for the
August.
15th or the 22nd?
August 15th. And I apologize, I
Okay.
didn't know you were online, so I apologize for that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I've just been listening.
Is our goal, Commissioner, 2 weeks or 3 weeks?
Well, it's an open question right
Sure.
now.
Yeah.
And I guess.
I'm going to be on vacation in 2 weeks, so I won't be here. So you can meet without me, certainly.
Need
But
Jim.
I was thinking 3.
What's the wish of everyone? Is 3 weeks okay, or you would prefer 2?
Well, I just think from the expediency standpoint, and I think part of, what was prepared to have people respond to is helpful, just as we kind of think about the philosophy that's underlying incentives. But I think there's already been a lot of talk about the process. And so I also wonder if we almost try to plan backwards from in terms of when would our ideal policy be going to the city commission to be approved, and also get some feedback on that from developers. Is there enough opportunity to weigh in? And so we begin with the end in mind in terms of this is our goal, as opposed to just seeing kind of how it unfolds, which will help hold us accountable to trying to meet some of those deadlines and get feedback not only on what we want to talk about when it comes to incentives, but make sure that process is incredibly transparent so people know where their opportunities to provide their perspective exist.
So Jim, I see you checking your dates. What are you coming up with on your magic Google machine?
I mean, I think trying to meet the week of the 15th, if not on the 15th, is the next time if we're actually going to try to bring the planning commission in. And I don't know about their availability or some other time that week. As far as when we want to finish by, that's a good point. Should we, try to say we're trying to get done by October 2nd or something like that? Is that,
I guess, when is the, quick question, when is the growth plan scheduled to be published?
I think that's end of the year, maybe next spring.
Okay.
Or like, end of the year.
I mean, I guess it depends on our inputs, right? If we're looking at what do we want to consider as we're thinking about these types of incentives, I think the growth plan obviously is very important. I'm sure that there's a growth plan on the books right now, but I think it's difficult to say, hey, we want these types of buildings and products without saying, and in these areas because of this.
Yep.
So expediting this is really important. Can we get it done with 3 meetings by the beginning of October? I would be very surprised if we could do that and do it properly towards the commissioner's point.
I would be surprised as well too. I appreciate the mayor wanting us to expedite it, but I was there the last time and it takes a long time. But once again, I want to reiterate, there's no rush. I mean, even though developers would like us to know, this is setting a roadmap for a long time long after we're not on here. So it's important that you do it so it's correct and will stand the test, but because we're setting precedents that will last a long time. So that's the thing. And I actually think it also applies to West Fargo and Moorhead even. I mean, you want to make sure that we're kind of all heading in the right direction.
I think to Levi's point, you could set October 1st as trying to get there, but as things go on, if we delay, we delay, and we will. We will not make a decision unless we're sure. But on the growth plan, many of the concepts are out there already, and I think that Mark and Nicole can give us those. I think Arlette can give us those. I think Park Board has some goals. Those aren't going to be hard to incorporate into this. Unfortunately for this commission, it's really going to be us that decides what we want to incentivize taking in that. But I do think we have to hear from them so they can help us make our decision making. Jim, I would just suggest the 15th is fine, but maybe in that interim timeframe, we could meet with the planning and with Park Board and you get some input from them so that when we come back to our meeting, we can start to bring some of that already into that. If you want to bring them on vacation with you or whatever, I don't care, but I think Arlette has some ideas of where they're headed, and I think the consultants are easily available, but I think we'd like some of that input, and I think there's some, quote, basic principles they've already landed on.
Anything more to add?
Well, just work with Dave on scheduling any special meetings we may need.
That's great. And so, and if anybody wants to make any comments right now, we'd love to have you. But otherwise, I think we've kind of had a good conversation. And so we don't need to just keep going unless somebody has something else to add. I want to thank everybody for coming today. And with that, we are adjourned.